News this evening. Today, President Trump became the first sitting president to attend Supreme Court arguments as the justices discussed birthright citizenship. And the president did not seem pleased by what he saw. CBS's Natalie Brand is live in Washington tonight with the arguments. And Natalie, how the justices quizzed the attorneys?
Yeah, a lot of intense questioning, especially directed to the president's solicitor general, who is arguing in favor of this executive order. On the other side, you had the legal team for the plaintiffs in this case representing families who would be impacted, and that includes a Honduras citizen with a pending asylum case who currently lives in New Hampshire.
ACLU National Legal Director Cecilia Wong pumped her fists, leaving the Supreme Court Wednesday after presenting her argument that President Trump's executive order seeking to end birthright citizenship is unconstitutional.
I am confident that the court is going to turn back this president's effort to radically rewrite.
All right, people, welcome back to Jack Mockler. Trump made history by visiting the Supreme Court, but the moment unraveled when he walked out mid-hearing while opposing counsel spoke, then launched a public tirade against the court itself. What should have been a gesture of respect for judicial authority instead revealed a president unable to accept even the appearance of constitutional constraint. This was supposed to be a moment of presidential deference to judicial authority, a signal that the executive branch respected the constitutional role of the courts in interpreting the nation's foundational legal document. Instead, it became a masterclass in how not to handle disagreement, a public display of presidential fragility that raised serious questions about whether the man occupying the Oval Office could actually accept the legitimacy of judicial decisions that went against his preferences.
Our 14th Amendment rule of birthright citizenship.
President Trump attended part of the arguments in person, a first for a sitting president. He posted after, quote, "We are the only country in the world stupid enough to allow birthright citizenship." The president's team argued before the court that right does not automatically belong to children born in parents who are in the country illegally or temporarily.
It operates as a powerful pull factor for illegal immigration and rewards illegal aliens who not only violate the immigration laws, but also jump in front of those who follow the rules.
But justices, even some of the court's conservatives, appeared skeptical of the administration's argument during questioning.
It's a new world. It's the same Constitution.
The conservative majority court ruled against the president's global tariff policy earlier this year. And while the justices had tough questions for both sides Wednesday, legal experts say they did not appear to be highly conflicted.
Maybe what they were struggling with is how to write the opinion, not necessarily how it's going to come out.
Lower courts have found the president's executive order illegal, pointing to precedent from the late 19th century.
Are you asking us to overrule then our cases, one of which said that a child of illegal aliens?
The case at the center of this drama was one of the most consequential constitutional questions to reach the Supreme Court in decades, a dispute over whether the 14th Amendment's guarantee of birthright citizenship actually meant what it had been understood to mean for over 150 years. Trump had made ending birthright citizenship a central pillar of his immigration agenda, convinced that children born to non-citizens on American soil should not automatically receive the rights and privileges of citizenship. The legal battle had been building for months, with Trump's administration pushing the courts to reinterpret constitutional language that had been settled law since the aftermath of the Civil War. The 14th Amendment was passed specifically to ensure that formerly enslaved people and their descendants would be recognized as full citizens, and its language was deliberately broad, declaring that all persons born or naturalized in the United States.
CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand is joining us right now live outside the White House. And Natalie, what do we know about why President Trump wants to be at those arguments?
Yeah, Mugo, he first mentioned that he would be attending in his comments to reporters yesterday afternoon or evening. And recall that he had floated the idea of attending the arguments in the tariffs case, but ultimately he did not. We know that that case did not go in his favor. I think attending the case signals the importance of this case to the president himself and his administration. He's argued that birthright citizenship, as it's been interpreted, is, quote, one of the many great scams of our time. And as Katrina so articulately laid out, the administration argues that the 14th Amendment had to do with babies of formerly enslaved individuals, accusing people in modern times of exploiting it, including, quote, what he's called Chinese billionaires. Of course,
and subject to its jurisdiction are citizens of the country and of the state wherein they reside. For generations, that language had been understood to mean exactly what it said. If you are born on American soil, you are an American citizen, regardless of your parents' immigration status. But Trump wanted to upend that understanding, to argue that the amendment didn't actually mean what it said, that there were hidden conditions and limitations that had been ignored for over a century and a half. The Supreme Court had agreed to hear the case, recognizing its enormous constitutional significance, and oral arguments were scheduled for what would become an unforgettable day in the history of American jurisprudence.
Challengers, critics point to past precedent and federal law, saying that this order that he signed on day one of his second administration is illegal. So really, this case now before the U.S. Supreme Court tests one of the cornerstones of, as we know, one of his key pieces of his agenda, which is, his crackdown on immigration, and the implications, again, as Katrina laid out, could be sweeping.
Yeah, and I want to also talk about something else that the president is doing later today. He's addressing the nation tonight about this ongoing war with Iran. What can we expect there?
Yeah, well, the White House announced this primetime address shortly after the president told reporters that the U.S. would be leaving Iran soon, predicting it could be another 2 to 3 weeks. So we'll have to wait and listen and see if he lays out kind of an exit strategy here or next steps on the ground, which critics, particularly those on Capitol Hill,
Trump's legal team had prepared extensively, crafting arguments designed to persuade the justices that birthright citizenship should be eliminated or at least severely restricted. They argued that the amendment's language about being subject to the jurisdiction of the United States meant that children of undocumented immigrants didn't qualify, that their parents weren't truly subject to American law in the way the amendment required. It was a novel legal theory, one that had been rejected by courts for generations, but Trump was determined to push it as far as it would go, and he wanted to be there in person when his lawyers made their case to the nation's highest court. The decision to attend was unprecedented, absolutely without precedent in American history. No sitting president had ever shown up at the Supreme Court to watch oral arguments in a case.
Have accused the administration of not doing to this point. What is the plan moving forward? What is the update with these negotiations as we approach that deadline that he had previously set for this coming Monday, April 6th. In a new interview with Reuters this morning, he also said that U.S. military forces will leave Iran soon and could potentially return for hotspots if needed. He also, in that interview, said that he's going to be critical of NATO, which is something that CBS News has confirmed. He's expected to address NATO in this speech. We've heard him in recent weeks really take aim at the military alliance for not doing more, for European countries not doing more to secure the Strait of Hormuz. So we are expecting to hear more about that. And he even told Reuters that he's considering withdrawing from that key alliance. Obviously, you know, this is an alliance that has been a cornerstone of the international order since the end of World War II, Mugo.
Presidents traditionally maintained a careful distance from the judiciary, understanding that the appearance of interference or pressure could undermine the independence of the courts. Even presidents who cared deeply about particular cases stayed away, letting the legal process unfold without their physical presence in the courtroom. But Trump broke that tradition, deciding that he would be there in person, sitting in the front row, watching his lawyers make their case to the justices. On the surface, it might have seemed like a demonstration of presidential engagement with the constitutional process, But what actually unfolded was something else entirely. When Trump walked into the Supreme Court building and took his seat in the front row of the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Court observers, journalists, and legal professionals all understood that they were witnessing something that had never happened before: a president of the United States personally attending Supreme Court oral arguments. The justices themselves were aware of his presence, and the proceedings continued with their usual decorum and professionalism. Trump's lawyers rose to present their case, laying out their arguments against birthright citizenship with the passion and precision that such a high-stakes constitutional question demanded. They spoke about the original intent of the 14th Amendment, about the need to interpret the Constitution in light of modern immigration challenges, about the alleged abuses of the current system. Trump sat in the front row, listening intently, presumably pleased with the performance of his legal team. But then the argument shifted. The opposing counsel rose to present their case, and here is where the unprecedented presidential visit took its dramatic turn. Trump had listened to his side, had heard the arguments he wanted to hear, had basked in the attention of being the first president to attend such a proceeding. But when the lawyers arguing against his position began to speak, when they started making their case for why birthright citizenship should remain the law of the land, when they articulated the constitutional and historical reasons why the 14th Amendment meant exactly what generations of courts had understood it to mean, Trump couldn't take it. He sat through perhaps 10 or 15 minutes of the opposing argument, and then he simply got up and walked out. The President of the United States, the most powerful person in the world, could not sit through a legal argument that contradicted his preferred position. He had to leave. He had to exit the courtroom rather than listen to opposing counsel make their case. Think about the significance of that for a moment. This was not some street corner debate where someone was shouting insults at him. This was the Supreme Court of the United States, the highest judicial body in the land, conducting its business in the most respectful and professional manner imaginable. The opposing counsel were not attacking Trump personally. They were making constitutional arguments, citing legal precedent, engaging in the kind of civil discourse that has characterized Supreme Court proceedings for generations. But Trump couldn't handle it. He couldn't listen to arguments against his position without becoming so agitated that he had to leave the room. It was a stunning display of presidential thin-skinnedness that left everyone who witnessed it struggling to process what they had just seen. The walkout itself was remarkable enough, but what happened afterward was even more revealing. Trump emerged from the Supreme Court building and immediately began complaining to anyone who would listen. He told reporters and aides that the argument had been unfair, that the justices had been biased against him, that the whole process was rigged. He attacked the court, attacked the opposing lawyers, attacked the very institution he had just honored with his unprecedented presence. The historic gesture of attending the Supreme Court had become a platform for presidential grievance, an opportunity for Trump to demonstrate that his respect for the judiciary was conditional, that it evaporated the moment he heard something he didn't like. It was a textbook example of Trump's pattern. When things go his way, everything is great. When they don't, nothing is fair and everyone is out to get him. This story becomes even more significant when you consider the context of Trump's recent history with the Supreme Court. Just months before this birthright citizenship argument, Trump had suffered a major defeat at the hands of the same court. He had tried to impose sweeping tariffs using emergency powers, arguing that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act gave him the authority to unilaterally tax imports from virtually every country trading with the United States. The Supreme Court had rejected that argument in a decisive 6-3 ruling, declaring that the power to impose tariffs was a branch of the taxing power that the Constitution reserves exclusively to Congress. It was a major loss for Trump, stripping him of his fastest and most flexible economic weapon and exposing the administration to billions of dollars in potential refund claims. That defeat was still fresh in Trump's mind when he walked into the Supreme Court for the birthright citizenship argument. He knew the justices were willing to rule against him. He knew that his legal theories were not always accepted by the courts. He knew that even his own appointees, justices like Gorsuch and Barrett, had sided against him on the tariffs case. So when he sat in that courtroom and heard the opposing counsel making what sounded like strong arguments against his position, when he heard the justices asking skeptical questions, when he sensed that this case might also go against him, he couldn't handle it. The tension, the anxiety, the fear of losing again, it all became too much, and he had to leave rather than sit through the rest of the argument. This is part of a larger and deeply troubling pattern in Trump's relationship with the judiciary. When courts rule against him, Trump doesn't accept their decisions as legitimate exercises of judicial authority. He attacks, he complains, he says the courts are biased and the judges are unfair. He tries to undermine public confidence in the judiciary, suggesting that the legal system is rigged against him and his supporters. He calls judges names, demands their removal from cases, and suggests that the entire judicial process is corrupt. It's a pattern that has been documented repeatedly throughout his presidency, from his attacks on the so-called Obama judges who ruled against him, to his demands that specific justices be removed from cases involving his administration. And it's a pattern that has serious implications for the health of American democracy. The President of the United States is supposed to respect the independence of the judiciary. The President is supposed to accept that courts have the authority to interpret the Constitution and to strike down executive actions that exceed constitutional limits. The President is supposed to understand that sometimes he loses, that the system of checks and balances means that no branch of government has unlimited power. But Trump seems incapable of accepting that fundamental constitutional reality. He views the courts as obstacles to be overcome rather than as co-equal branches of government with legitimate authority. He views judicial decisions that go against him as acts of hostility rather than as exercises of constitutional interpretation. And he responds to those decisions not with respect for the rule of law, but with personal attacks and attempts to undermine the judiciary's legitimacy. The birthright citizenship case is a perfect example of why this pattern is so dangerous. Trump wanted to change a constitutional principle that had been settled for over 150 years. He wanted to reinterpret the 14th Amendment in a way that would deny citizenship to millions of American-born children. That was his policy preference, and he was entitled to advocate for it through the legal system. But when he showed up at the Supreme Court and couldn't even sit through the opposing counsel's argument, when he had to walk out rather than listen to legal analysis that contradicted his position, when he then complained that the whole process was unfair, he demonstrated something deeply troubling about his relationship with the rule of law. He wasn't treating the Supreme Court as a legitimate institution whose decisions he would respect even if he disagreed with them. He was treating it as an enemy to be defeated, a barrier to be overcome, an obstacle to be eliminated. Think about what it means when a president can't sit through a Supreme Court argument without walking out. Think about what it says about his temperament, his judgment, his ability to handle disagreement. This is not how leaders are supposed to behave. Leaders are supposed to be able to listen to opposing viewpoints, to engage with arguments they disagree with, to make decisions based on careful consideration of all the relevant factors. Leaders are supposed to be able to handle opposition without melting down, to accept losses without lashing out, to respect institutions even when those institutions rule against them. But Trump can't do any of that. He can't listen to disagreement without getting upset. He can't accept losses without attacking. He can't respect institutions that don't give him what he wants. And that's not just a personal failing. It's a constitutional crisis waiting to happen. The Supreme Court is going to rule on the birthright citizenship case, and there's a strong possibility that Trump will lose again. The constitutional arguments against his position are powerful. The legal precedent is overwhelming, and even the justices he appointed have shown a willingness to rule against him when the law requires it. When that ruling comes down, if it goes against Trump, We know exactly what's going to happen. He's going to attack the court. He's going to say the justices are biased. He's going to complain that the whole process is rigged. He's going to try to undermine public confidence in the judiciary. That's what he always does. That's the pattern we've seen over and over again. And that pattern is dangerous, deeply dangerous for the health of American democracy. The framers of the Constitution created a system of checks and balances precisely to prevent any one branch of government from becoming too powerful. They gave the judiciary the power to interpret the Constitution and to strike down executive actions that exceed constitutional limits. They gave the president the power to enforce the law, but not to ignore it. They created a system in which no single person or institution has total control. That system depends on mutual respect among the branches. It depends on the president accepting that the courts have legitimate authority. It depends on everyone in government understanding that the rule of law applies to everyone, including the president. And when a president refuses to accept that fundamental constitutional reality, the whole system is threatened. Trump's walkout from the Supreme Court argument was a small moment in the grand scheme of things, a few minutes of presidential petulance that would be forgotten by most people within days. But it was also a symptom of something much larger and much more troubling. It was a symptom of a president who cannot accept that there are limits on his power. It was a symptom of a president who views the judiciary as an enemy rather than as a co-equal branch of government. It was a symptom of a president who will not respect the rule of law when it conflicts with his preferences. And that symptom, repeated over and over again in different contexts in different cases, points to a fundamental problem at the heart of American democracy. What happens when a president who can't accept judicial authority loses a major Supreme Court case? What happens when the court issues a ruling that goes against everything he believes and he decides that he's not going to accept it? What happens when the president refuses to enforce a court decision? Those are the questions that this story raises, and they are questions that don't have easy answers. The Constitution provides mechanisms for resolving disputes between branches, but those mechanisms depend on everyone acting in good faith. They depend on the president respecting the court's authority even when he disagrees. They depend on the system working the way the framers intended. And when a president shows that he can't even sit through a Supreme Court argument without walking out, it raises serious concerns about whether he would accept a major constitutional defeat. This is why the birthright citizenship case matters so much, not just because of the substantive constitutional question at issue, but because of what it reveals about the president's relationship with the judiciary. Trump cared enough about this case to do something no other president had ever done, to show up in person at the Supreme Court and watch the arguments unfold. But he couldn't care enough to stay for the whole thing. He couldn't care enough to listen to the other side. He couldn't care enough to respect the process even when it wasn't going his way. And that tells you everything you need to know about how he views the courts and how he would handle a major constitutional loss. The pattern is clear, and it's been established over years of presidential behavior. Trump attacks courts that rule against him. He demands that judges be removed from cases involving his administration. He calls judicial decisions unfair and biased. He tries to undermine public confidence in the judiciary by suggesting that the system is rigged. And each time he does this, he chips away at the foundations of American democracy. Each attack on the courts, each complaint about biased judges, each suggestion that the legal system is corrupt makes it harder for the judiciary to function as an independent check on presidential power. Each attack makes it more likely that future presidents will feel empowered to disregard court decisions they don't like. Each attack weakens the rule of law. The Supreme Court is not supposed to be a political battleground. It's supposed to be an independent institution that interprets the Constitution based on law and legal reasoning, not on partisan preferences. The justices are supposed to be free to make decisions based on their understanding of the law, without fear of retaliation from the president or anyone else. But when the president attacks the court every time it rules against him, when he suggests that justices who disagree with him are biased or corrupt, when he tries to undermine the court's legitimacy, he threatens that independence. He makes it harder for the justices to do their jobs without political interference. He creates an environment in which the court feels pressure to rule in ways that will avoid presidential attacks. This is not speculation. This is not hyperbole. This is a documented pattern of behavior that has been observed repeatedly throughout Trump's time in office. He attacked the judges who ruled against his travel ban. He attacked the judges who ruled against his immigration policies. He attacked the judges who ruled against his tariff authority. He attacked the judges who ruled against his handling of the census. Every time a court ruled against him, he attacked the court. Every time a judge issued a decision he didn't like, he attacked the judge. And now he's done it again, walking out of a Supreme Court argument and then complaining that the process was unfair and the justices were biased. The pattern is clear, and it's not going to change. The birthright citizenship case will be decided, and there will be a winner and a loser. If Trump loses, as most legal experts expect, the question is how he will respond. Will he accept the decision and move on? Will he respect the court's authority even though he disagrees? Or will he attack the court, complain about biased justices, and try to undermine the legitimacy of the ruling? If his past behavior and his behavior on the day of the oral arguments are any indication, we already know the answer. Trump will attack. Trump will complain. Trump will try to undermine the court's authority. That's what he always does. That's who he is. And that's why this story matters, because it's not just about one president's bad behavior. It's about whether the system of checks and balances can survive a president who refuses to accept judicial authority.